In which war did you serve?
Korean War and the Soviet-Afghan War.
And what was your branch of service?
U.S. Marine Corps in Korea, in the Korean War, and as a USIA employee in the first trip to Afghanistan, and then as a freelance journalist thereafter.
And what was your highest rank?
Corporal.
Okay. In what general locations did you serve?
General locations?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I served in North Carolina, I served in Guam, and I served in Korea in many of the locations where the Marines were stationed. Busan is one, for example. Chorwan is another. Hagaru is another. And that's pretty much it.
Okay. So were you drafted or did you enlist?
Volunteer. I enlisted.
Where were you living at the time?
In Lynn, Massachusetts. Lynn.
And do you recall the date?
1951. I served in 1951 to 1954, but my date of entry was 1951.
Okay. Why did you enlist?
Oh, well, gosh, the Korean War was raging. I was a young person with little life experience. I think I was trying to somehow take on some value as a contributor to society in some meaningful way. And in my own mind at the time, I thought the thing I should do is to enlist in the military. I have to admit I was a poor student and I was not doing well in school. So that may have provided some impetus for me to leave school and to enlist in the Marine Corps.
Okay. And now why did you pick the Marines?
Well, probably, this is probably comical, but because of John Wayne movies, to be honest, they did, of course, have an effect on me. And it was pride of service. It's an elite organization, and I guess I wanted to be a part of an elite organization. But the John Wayne in the movies did have an impact on my thinking process, I would guess,
Right.
to be honest.
Yeah. How old were you when you enlisted?
17.
17. Okay, so tell me about your first days in service.
First days would have been training, which was rigorous at Parris Island in South Carolina. And it's famous for being tough on recruits. And that was no exaggeration. The discipline is extremely rigid, but the training is good. They spend a lot of time on marksmanship. The Marines are noted and prideful of their marksmanship abilities. And I qualified as an expert rifleman, which I was very proud of. And it was rigorous. The camaraderie was great. And that served to fill that empty void from leaving home, the thought of leaving home and all your friends and family behind. But the camaraderie was almost instant because everyone was in the same boat. And so we got along pretty well. It's a good organization, and it's an honorable organization, and I was proud to be a member of it.
Okay. All right, so do you have any memorable experiences from your training, your early training?
Well, probably sleeping in an igloo, a snow house, which was a first for me. Even though I got to do that later on in civilian life as a photographer, photographing polar bear, I slept in an igloo at that time and traveled with Eskimos, but that was much later, many, many years later. But yeah, that was new, and learning to snowshoe and learning how to care for equipment in extreme frigid temperatures, which is very important, particularly with your weapon, because you don't want to be in a war zone if your weapon doesn't work. That's not a good situation. So I think those things probably. The rigid discipline, even though it was a little bit frightening for a young kid, and that's what I was at the time, somehow I didn't mind. You know, I guess that everything was pretty well clear. Everything was clearly explained, what they wanted, what they were looking for, what they expected from you as a recruit. So there was never really any doubt. Everything was pretty clear cut, well organized, and but rigid. You know, they didn't. No horseplay was allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we did sneak off from time to time, and horseplay did, you know, snowball fights and different kinds of things would enter the fray. But they knew that. That's part of living. So yeah, okay.
Do you remember any of your instructors?
Yes, I remember Sergeant Daigle. Yeah, I think that's Daigle, I think, is how you would spell that. And I remember him clearly because, one, he was from Boston, and so we had some things in common, like the Red Sox and so on. But he was a tough guy. He was, which all of the Marine instructors are noted for their discipline. So you wouldn't find any that were lax in that area. But so he was a tough guy. But I remember him, and there was another guy from South Carolina that was a staff sergeant. Oh gosh, if I can remember his name, Taylor. Yeah, Sergeant Taylor. And during some of my training, he was both an instructor and a squad leader. And a good man. He was from the South somewhere. I'm going to say South Carolina, perhaps. He may have been his home. And but he was quite a character. He used to tell us stories about World War II. He was an older gentleman. And so he was pretty well admired by most. So, and my regimental commander, Colonel Taylor, was interestingly was trained in artillery in Canada. Now I don't know what organization he was with in Canada, whether he was in the Canadian military. I'm not really quite sure. I think he may have been, but I'm just not absolutely certain. But he was the regimental commander of the 10th Marines, which was a 155 millimeter artillery organization. And my own personal job was I drove ammo to the guns. I took ammo. That's why I'm hard of hearing. Those guns make a loud noise. Those 155s really roar when they go off, especially when you get a battery of 4 or 5 guns, you know, going off at the same time. You jump right out of your shirt. So, you know. But yeah, so Colonel Taylor, and there was a Colonel Blanchard, and I don't remember him reverently because he sort of had the reputation of being a little, can I say it, weird? A little different. Maybe that's a better way to put it, diplomatic way to put it. Yeah, Colonel, different, yeah, that would serve Colonel Blanchard, I think, probably pretty well. I don't know where he was from. I'm thinking Maryland, but I'm not certain. So, and there were others that will come to me as time goes on, but it's hard to dredge them all up right at the moment.
Sure, yeah. Other than sneaking off and having snowball fights, how else did you get through basic training?
Well, I think there was a bit of book study, and which I did pretty well in, and I found it fascinating. And I found that when I left boot camp, I found that I was prepared. I had accomplished a niche in life, or a niche in this particular endeavor, that I felt fairly well trained and prepared for whatever came next, for which I had no idea, at the time. So I would say I found it complete, clear, and rewarding, because I think it gave you a little bit of a self-image that I didn't have when I went there. I was a little bit, and there's very few people that go there and act macho with those drill instructors, or DIs as we call them. Very few people do that because they're no match. So that's their method. The methodology is to be tough, gruff, He-Man kind of people, to try to hope that you become the same thing. But discipline is very important to the Marines, and if they tell you to do something, you had better do it. If they tell you to do it a certain way, you had better do it a certain way. Because punishment is swift and just and certain if you're not, behaving properly and doing the right thing.
You mean that in terms of in a war setting?
Yeah.
Okay, so after boot camp, where did you go?
Okay, after boot camp, I went to, where did I go right after boot camp? I went to Camp Lejeune.
And
That's in North Carolina.
And what did you do there?
The same thing, no, not the same thing, I'm sorry, I take that back. Boot camp was totally different. That's when I became delivering ammunition to the 155. I became a member of the 10th Marine Regiment, which was an artillery regiment. And they trained me in driving these huge ammo trucks, because I didn't even have a driver's license when I went to boot camp. I had driven my father's car, around the block kind of thing, but I had no experience. And these trucks had 5 speeds, they were complicated vehicles, big, strong, powerful, all-wheel drive kind of things, And generally you would tow a trailer, and you had to learn how to back trailers up and park them, and the trailer as well as the back of your truck would be full of ammo. So caution in driving was very important for obvious reasons, because you had enough TNT behind you to blow you to the moon should you get into trouble. And so that I became a member of the ammo portion of the 10th Marines, and that's what I did until I shipped out.
Okay. Do you have any other memories from Camp Lejeune?
Just probably my making lots of friends and sharing the travails of the day with friends, and who were all, going through what you are. You're not quite sure what to expect, and you're a little bit fearful of the drill instructors and squad leaders and anyone with rank, because the discipline of the Marine Corps is so severe that everyone's afraid they're going to make a mistake and end up in jail or something. So it's a very highly disciplined organization, no doubt about it. So Camp Lejeune, occasionally I got a chance to get away for weekends at Camp Lejeune, and I would generally go home with friends. There's one friend from Maryland, a guy by the name of Carrico, Carrico, and he had red hair. We called him Red, but I think his name was Don. But I'm not absolutely positive about that. But he used to take us to his home, and his family would feed us and make of us, and oh, the warriors are here, And we liked that, we liked the attention that the uniform brought, and that's part of it, and our shoes were always spit shine so you could shave in them, they were so shiny. But again, that's part of the Marine discipline. You never go out in a Marine uniform and look disheveled. Oh, mercy. would you do that? You would be tempting fate. So yeah, but you know, it just came automatic because it was so ingrained that you didn't even really think about it. You just did it. You just made sure everything was to the best of your ability. But we used to spend hours spit shining shoes. And have you ever heard of spit shining shoes? Yeah. Okay. So kiwi polish. Kiwi polish is kind of the standard. It's like Kodak film. You know, whenever I was photographing in Afghanistan, I always shot Kodachrome 64 because of the high resolution, number one, and the fact that you could take a 35 millimeter, 24 by 36 millimeter slide and make a 1624 print out of it and still have sharpness. And that takes good film as well as technique. You know, technique has to be there. But Kodachrome 64 is my love.
Okay, so could you describe a typical day for you in service?
Typical day would be to get up at about 0500, I think, was Reveille, as I recall. We go to breakfast. From there, we will go to our various jobs, whatever that may be. And generally, you have the orders the day before, what you're to do the next day. It might be to go to the motor pool, get the big truck, and this was a typical day. Load it up with ammunition, go to the ammo dump, which were steel bunkers in the side of a hill, and load up with ammunition. By the way, each 155 millimeter shell weighed about 100 pounds. So it was very physical. And not to mention the amount of TNT that you were sitting on, you know, was enough to send you to the moon should you get careless and to have an accident or something. But probably the most sensitive things to handle were the fuses. The fuses are things they screw into the front of the shell. And they can have a time explosion. They have different settings. The people who work on the gun do that. We just deliver the implement and they do the adjusting. But those are very sensitive. And if you drop one, it would definitely go off. And so you have to be very careful handling those. And so that was pretty much it. Another typical day would be a living quarters inspection by the brass, and we had to scrub from stem to stern, and it was never quite well enough because the inspection always brought some criticism, of course. You know, that's what it's designed to do. And even if it was perfect, they would never tell you. So that was another day that we experienced from time to time. And then we'd have special details like the rifle range. And if you go to the rifle range, you spend 3-4 days what they call snapping in. And snapping in is getting used to the positions like prone, sitting, kneeling, adjusting the sling on the rifle so that you can hold it steady. Setting your sights, dry firing, and like adjusting your sights at a short range before you go on to the big range, which starts at 200 yards and goes to 500 yards. You shoot at 200, 300, and 500. And so generally, and the Marines have the reputation for being very good shots. And I think that my marksmanship was excellent. While in, I did a little bit of shooting and hunting when I got discharged, and my marksmanship was always, I have a number of medals from competition I entered for the handgun in that particular instance. And so the shooting becomes part of your life. It loses a bit of its glamour or its excitement. It's just one more thing to master and to have under control, and like having a shiny pair of shoes, you know, it's just one of those things that Marines are expected to do. And but you can carry some of those traditions out into civilian life. I shine shoes now on occasion, maybe not to the degree that I did, certainly in boot camp. But And also, I think this almost sounds like a bit of bragging, but I think that the Marines also instill sort of an honor code and an honesty in you. And I'm not going to say that everyone took that with them for the rest of their life, because that's not so. But they did. They did instill that in you in boot camp, and I think some Marines did carry that out into civilian life, and they approached people a little differently, and were firm in their resolve, but yet fair and honest in their dealings with other people. And I think that that's reflected in when you get married and you take vows. You don't cheat on your wife. You don't spend all the money on whiskey and be, disheveled and stumbling around all the time. Various things of that, like that in civilian life, I think probably were probably introduced, even if subconsciously, when you're in boot camp. This is just my own thinking. I can't prove that with any data, but I think that is perhaps where that came from. Because as a 17-year-old kid, I didn't have any discipline. I was just a 17-year-old kid from a city, and my discipline was the street. So, and we used to. I was not a particularly good kid. I was in trouble a lot, and all the gang I hung around with, we were always in trouble for something, nothing major, nothing, no felonies or anything, but just, being a pain in the neck in the neighborhood probably is the best way to characterize it. So,
Okay, so after Camp Lejeune, where did you go?
Okay, I went to Camp Pendleton in California. And there I underwent advanced infantry training. And after that, that was, how long was that? I'm thinking 3 weeks to a month. I'm thinking, gosh, Mary, it's... advanced infantry training was really getting a person physically fit, I think, to encounter more. We hiked 20, 30-mile hikes with heavy packs and so on, up into high country and so on. So it's probably a good thing we were all young. I wouldn't want to attempt that today. And that was to get your body conditioned for what was to come. And I would characterize it as intense. Intense instead of advanced. I would say it's intense. So, and then after that, I went to Guam. And Guam's in the South Pacific. And there I served again in heavy equipment. And how long was I in Guam? Several months in Guam. And from there to Korea. And Korea was actually only 3 months. And then from there to Treasure Island in California.
Okay, so can you tell me more about your time in Guam?
Yes, it was not a very exciting time. I served in heavy equipment, and other than that was really an everyday job. Aside from other jobs or duties that Marines are always engaged in, like guard duty, overhauling equipment. Nothing very exciting in as far as storytelling goes. You know, it was all pretty, pretty standard fare, I guess, really. And the weather was great there. You know, that's so that was a plus. And did I say pickle? Did I tell you about pickle medals? Did I put them in?
No, when was that?
Oh gosh, pickle medals was before I went to Guam. Oh gosh.
After Camp Pendleton?
Yeah. So that was that would have been 50. I would say probably late '53 would be Pickle Meadows, and that was a very cold climb, below zero most all the time. We lived in snow houses, occasionally in what they call shelter half, which two guys get together with a half, put it together and make a tent. So they call them shelter halves. And because that's really what it is, only half a house. So, but our duty there was to, this was before Korea, was to get you used for Korea. And for the Korean draft, as they called it. They called it a draft because they pulled Marines from different places to go. Although in the case of Korea, I volunteered to go on the draft. But anyway, Pickle Meadows was designed to get you used to the climate because it was very cold, and wearing what they call Mickey Mouse boots. Those are big thermal boots, and they called them Mickey Mouse because it looks like the caricature Mickey Mouse. You know how big and bulbous his feet appear? Well, that's the way it looked when you put them on. They were heavy, but they were extremely warm. And they also served in some small way. If you stepped on a small anti-personnel mine, you might not lose your foot because these boots were very heavy and bulbous. Depending on where you stepped on the mine, you know, there's of course exceptions to everything. But there were people who stepped on mines with those who came away and did not lose their foot or lower leg like often happens, or worse. And again, the cold climb weapons maintenance was a major part of the training. Delubricating a weapon so that it didn't freeze up, because if your weapon was not dry and it's 40 below zero, it's not going to work. So that was important. And so we had compass classes on you know, and finding directions and map reading and compass training. And we had classrooms insofar as tactics, formations, squad formations, platoon formations, all of the general kinds of applications that you might find yourself involved in. So I would say that's pretty much it.
Now, where is Pickle Meadows?
Pickle Meadows is in California, Northern California. And there's another name on the map for it. The Pickle Meadows designation is the Marine handle. Now, what the pickle, where that came from, I have no idea. Maybe in the summer they grow pickle. I really don't know, but that's the handle, as they say, for that particular place. And while there, we towards the end of our training, we had some celebrities come and entertain us. And you know, I'm sorry, it's sad to say I don't remember who, but we had some vocalists and some movie stars, a couple of movie stars came. It wasn't John Wayne, but there was another fellow that was acted in military movies. You know, I can't remember his name or the vocalist's name either. But and this group traveled to a lot of the Marine facilities and train the troops, you know, in various locales, and it was good for the morale of the troops to have that, you know. Say, gee, they haven't forgotten about us. Yeah.
Okay, so from there you went to Guam, and then from Guam you went to Korea.
Yeah.
So tell me about your experiences in Korea.
I guess that was my first notice of the utter destruction of war. Um, I guess I should have been prepared for it because, certainly some of the movies we had seen as kids displayed destruction from war. But it's not quite the same, because you don't have the smells, the sounds, the utter damage everywhere you look. Everything is in ruins. The people are, they don't have food. They don't have enough clothing for the bitter weather that's bound to commence in that country. And I think that I begin to take on a little bit of a political demeanor here because I did not like what I saw. I did believe that the United States was right to go to war in Korea at the time. I'm not sure of that now, today. And many of the wars that I've researched a lot of them are formulated on misinformation or disinformation, and then with the cooperative media sold to the public as the right thing to do, the honorable thing to do, when there are other dimensions to it that, invalidate that position. So I was glad to leave. The war was winding down when I left. It was beginning to wind down, and I treasured my friends and that I had made, and but I became really disillusioned with the whole idea of warfare, and I don't mean to say that if you're attacked you don't defend yourself. It's not, but when you introduce or you're the aggressor, the initial aggressor, if you're the one that goes to a country and drops bombs or shells or whatever, I just can't sign on to that. So, and I think my experiences later on in life, which civilian life, of course, is a lot different, obviously. That probably need not be said, but civilian life has its travails too. You have to make a living, you have to raise a family. I raised two beautiful daughters who are now both teachers, and I am so damn proud of them, if I can use that word. I'm sorry. One is also part of the Bohemian music group. She's a viola player. She's been on television. She travels around. She's a wonderful girl. And the other one is a teacher in California. That's Leslie, my youngest one. And great spirit, just a wonderful girl. They believe in education. They realize the importance of education. And yet they have their battles, getting funding and, getting various programs off the ground that they want to do. And particularly my daughter in Rhode Island, because Rhode Island is not as flush in money as California. So getting money for different programs is not the easiest thing in the world to do. So they got some of their dad's Marine spirit. Go get that money. And of course today, all of the news, all you hear about is all these terrible things happening in schools. I worry about them, because I don't know what we're going to have to do to stop that from happening. But
Now, you were talking about how, your experience in Korea, how that made you feel about war and what you think about war. When you were actually in the experience, Did you feel that it was wrong? Did you feel conflicted about it? How did it feel at the time?
Yeah. When I was first there, it was exciting. I used to revel in the stories that were around me from those who had been out on patrol, or those had been out on what they call the MLR, which is the main line of resistance. That's where most of the fighting takes place. At the time, I think that the first thing you were worried about was staying safe. And I don't mean ducking, I don't mean running away from the battle. I don't mean that at all. But I mean adopting, when the shooting starts to get down prone, doing the things you should do to protect yourself. And also watching out for your friends who watch out for you. And when you're part of a team, this comes automatic. You watch each other's backside, as we call it. And but most of the conflict, say politically or in my mind, came after leaving the area. Even though I was troubled at the time, and just seeing the utter destruction, and it's not pleasant to see cadavers everywhere, and the smells of a war zone are terrible. There's just nothing at all pleasant about it. You just can't wait to get away from the area and get back, and even to crawl into a tent is like, wow, I've died and gone to heaven just to get away from it. It is, but the stories from these places like Korea and Afghanistan stay with you. They have a hold on you. And so I think when a new war is introduced, or the government is talking about maybe we should go to war in Syria, or maybe or we went to war in Iraq, the various things, and then you realize that, gee, there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and yet 4 million people died in that war. Afghanistan was termed the hub of terrorism. They had nothing to do with 9/11. 9/11 was the excuse for going to Afghanistan. But I have proof that that decision was made long before. But I don't want to get into Afghanistan because this is different.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Did you see combat in Korea?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to talk any more about that?
I just assume not, Mary, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Were there casualties in your unit?
Casualties? Yes, there were, and usually they were the result of what is termed counter battery fire, and that's when you have when you in artillery, when you're ordered to shoot, they call it a fire mission, and the counter battery fire would generally follow a fire mission upon which the enemy is responding, and that's the counter battery. And the most danger, I think, in counter battery fire is because there's usually a lot of people in a small area, and one shell in the wrong place, and you could have many heavy casualties. But another very risky endeavor was patrols. There would be a 4-man patrol would go out, and they're doing what they call reconnoitering, which is just looking around to see, who's out there, what's out there, and so on. And but that's very risky because it's generally few people, and another patrol from the other side could wipe you over in an instant if you didn't happen to see where they were hiding or taking cover. And so that was, and also mines. Mines are, oh wow, mines, and of course they took a heavy toll on civilians too. But everything takes a toll on civilians. Artillery, obviously bombing. When bombers drop bombs, tons of bombs all over the place. We have a euphemism for collateral damage, but it doesn't begin to tell a story. It's, it's tough stuff.
Did you lose a lot of friends to casualties?
I lost. I didn't lose any of my real close friends, but I did have to bereave people that I knew. I might know them only by their first name. I might say a Mike or a John or whatever. But any loss is felt because they're another Marine that's killed is one of yours, and it's almost like a family member in a way. And your first reaction to that, I think, is one of anger. You want retribution in some way. And then I think after that, you begin to feel bad for the family, very sad for the family. Because you know that if you're Mr. and Mrs. Smith in a quiet little town in New Hampshire gets a letter from the Defense Department that their son's been KIA, you think about things like that. And it's hard to really elaborate on that subject, because I know the subject matter is different things to different people. And but I think most of my friends and acquaintances, I would say the majority, abhorred war after being exposed to it for just a short time because of the things you see and the things you're exposed to. Even though you see movies and you see black and white news footage, and but then when you actually see, smell, hear, it's different. So.
Okay. And do you want to talk any more about the casualties, or?
Not really. Yeah, I think that's.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
I have. I got. Of course, you get your service, your area ribbons, and I have the Good Conduct Medal, and I'm laughing because that's the way it's. Most everyone who receives it sort of views it that way, And Korean Service Medal. Expert Rifleman Medal. I'm kind of proud of that one because it's a little bit of effort and work involved in that. But that's about it. That's yeah.
So how did you get that Expert Rifleman Medal?
Well, of course the Marine training is excellent if you pay attention. And I was determined that I wanted to do well. As a youngster who had spent some time in New Hampshire before joining the Marine Corps, I had a little bit of firearms experience because my father and my uncle both used to shoot. They used to shoot skeet. And I think my uncle was a bit of a hunter too, hunt deer in New Hampshire. He lived in New Hampshire at the time. And so I was exposed to a little bit of that. And whenever he would say, "You want to go out and shoot?" I was always jump at the chance, And so I didn't have a fear of them. I respected them, but I didn't have a fear of them, and I wanted to become proficient. And when I saw that I had to hit targets 500 yards away, I thought, wow, this really calls for precision. Sights have to be set right, position has to be good, your breathing has to be good. Your hold has to be the 6 o'clock hold, as we used to call it, which is on the bottom of the target. All of those things became very important. But I have to say the training really is responsible for any skills that I may have learned there and possessed there and later on in life. So. In fact, when I got out of the military, I used to go target shooting quite often. And it was fun going to the club, seeing a lot of your old friends, many of whom also just got out of the military. Not always the same branch, various organizations, and so it was fun. In fact, I've taken my wife to the range on occasion, and she would shoot, once in a while. She didn't have the interest in it, of course, but just to tag along and see what it was all about.
Did you sustain any injuries?
Did I sustain any injuries? Hearing. And I'm working with the VA right now. I've made an application, I should put it that way, to look into some kind of aid, hearing aid. And like I don't have any trouble hearing you right now or understanding you, but sometimes like my telephone, I can't hear it, and various things. So I do have a bit of a hearing loss. And in some situations, I have to keep saying, "What? Excuse me," and I hate to do that because people look at you like, "What's wrong with you, boy?"
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you some questions about what daily life was like in service. So, how did you stay in touch with your family?
Through mail. And military men love to get mail. Mail call was the happiest part of the day. And but occasionally on telephone. Every once in a while I would phone them. They couldn't phone me, but I would phone them on occasion. If I went off the base for a weekend we used to go into a place called Jayville from the June, for example. And Jayville is short for Jacksonville, but all the Marines call it Jayville. So that's the way you would refer to it. But I would go in and I would phone them and talk to them for a little bit, and telephone calls. It wasn't all that expensive because the pay that we received, if I remember, I think I got $70 a month. I think that was my salary. So can't go too far on $70 a month. But that was with meals and room and board. But the daily life in the Marine Corps is Reveille's 0500, and that's when the guy blows that awful bugle. Then you get up and you shower, shave, and you better shave close because you have to fall out for inspection. Fall out for inspection, then you go to breakfast, and always in order, always in platoon form, And we used to, a lot of the guys used to clown around in the formation going to chow in the morning. And like you step on the guy's heel in front of you, it's just kind of horseplay like you would do in high school. But if you get caught, it did not go well. But we used to tempt fate like that every once in a while. And then after breakfast, you would go to whatever your assigned position or job was for that particular day. Sometimes we used to go out and clean the guns, take the guns apart, clean them. You might have to go to the armory and do the small arms, the rifles, pistols, machine guns, and so on. Or they send you out on a police detail. That's picking up trash around the base. Which is not a lot because the Marines are pretty careful about throwing stuff out of cars, and they just don't do that. So police details we did, and scrubbing barracks we did on occasion. Practicing marching, if there was some kind of a conference or celebration of some kind, like the Marine Corps birthday coming up or whatever, we would drill and practice to make sure our marching was acute and well done, and precision marching courses, because all the big brass, the generals, everybody would be present, and sometimes even the president would show up on occasion. So you want to, look your best. So that was kind of pretty much what a day was like. I won't go into cleaning latrines and that kind of stuff, that was part of it too, but So cleanliness was inherent in the training, uniforms. It's a different thing when you're in a war zone than when you're at a base in the United States, of course, because you don't have a washing machine in a war zone, which you do at a base, and that your appearance. If you were to walk out of the squad bay, that's where we slept. They call them squad bays. If you were to walk out of the squad bay and go to the PX to get cigarettes, I used to smoke. Can't believe it. I used to smoke a pack of Camels a day in those days. Wow. What a different time this is. But anyway, you go to the PX to get cigarettes, maybe chewing gum, candy bars, or whatever. You better be impeccably dressed. Just because you're going to run an errand for yourself doesn't mean if you go out and you're a little bit slovenly or a little bit, wrinkled or whatever, some officer going by in a car, just or walking by, see you, we climb on you, gets reported back to your organization. Yeah, and then you get what we used to call the, I don't know if I can say it, begins with an S detail. That meant you were in trouble. So.
Okay. So did you have enough supplies when you were in Korea? Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was the food like?
Food was, I think it would be like those restaurants that people are familiar with, where you take a tray and oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the name.
Like a buffet?
Yeah. And the food was nourishing. There was vegetables and meat and plenty of coffee, and you could have all you wanted. I didn't gain any weight at all in boot camp, even though I used to, when I went there, I was a little on the heavy side. And then I trimmed right down to somewhere around 140 or so. And I stayed pretty much there all the time I was in the military. And then when I got back out of the military, I gained weight again. But yeah, they keep you trim. And of course you're active too. You do a lot of marching and carrying head packs, and heavy packs rather. And doing manual labor of various kinds. You rake leaves up on the lawn around the barrack area, and keeping it clean so when you have inspection, there's always an inspection, it seems like. So you spend a lot of time preparing for inspection.
Did you feel pressure or stress?
I think I would have to say yes, you do. In the military, in a general sense, and yeah, I think that you could not ignore the stress and the pressure of being in a war zone, for example, or actually even just being the stress and pressure in Marine boot camp is enormous, and a lot of people don't make it because of that. They're famous for people not making it through their boot camp who end up becoming civilians again, and because it's rigid and it's tough. It's tough.
How did you handle the stress?
I think I didn't handle it consciously, but I think subconsciously, just making friends and comparing your misery with your pal in the next foxhole who has the same misery as you do, and talking about it and complaining about the drill instructors, complaining about the first sergeant, complaining about the battery officer or someone who may have made a life miserable that particular morning, and to talk about it with each other. I think that's how we handled it, and in that way you release it. But somehow you don't really. It's not ingrained in such a way that you can't function, and it's constantly there while you're in these organizations. There's always something constant in pressure or that you will experience in these organizations. So But I think just the subconscious clinging to your friends kind of thing gives you, resolve, and we complain to each other. I'm not going to let them get away with this and that. Did you see what that call them a name did? And complain about what the treatment that we were handed. But when you get back to civilian life, you realize that all of that discipline is done for a reason, and it's done so that when they say to you, Bruce, you and your fire team take that hill 691, your answer is yes, sir. You never hesitate on receiving an order to do what they tell you and so on. They want that instant accommodation from their soldiers and Marines. So they drill it into you.
All right. Was there anything that you did for good luck?
No, I never was an advocate of good luck symbols or I'm sure that subconsciously probably there were things you did. Like I always kept my weapons spotless because I realized that might be the only thing between me and oblivion. So, but again, that was drilled into you in the training too. But as far as just good luck, I didn't have any gestures or implements that I addressed or revered in that way. It just didn't cross my mind, I guess.
Okay, so how did people entertain themselves?
Well, the number one thing for all people serving out of the country, or even in the country if they're away from home, is mail with a capital M. Mm-hmm. Mail call was so. When I got a letter from home, I would read it and read it and read it, and carry it and read it, and eventually it would get all blurry from getting wet and so on. But you just read it and read it and read it. You just can't read it enough, And as you're reading it, your mind is going a million miles an hour, working in little different attributes and important messages that might come from the pages of your mail. But the mail is so important. My parents were very good at sending me mail, and I really appreciated that and told them that. But in addition to mail, we used to have group movies every once in a while. And Marilyn Monroe came to Korea, and I didn't happen to see her, but I had heard that she had been there. And there were other actors with her too, but of course all the guys remembered Marilyn. And but they used to have movies. When you get back into an area where there was no fighting, they used to have outdoor movies. And even though it was very cold sitting there, it was still entertainment. And even every once in a while, it was funny. They would show a war movie, and everybody would boo and hiss and trying to sort of implicate that or sort of say that we're the soldiers. That's baloney kind of thing. They would make fun of the movie, but it was entertainment though, so it's good. But the sociology of being in a group is interesting because there are different personalities. And some you get very close to and others not quite as close. Usually in your own fire team, it's a very well-knit group and everybody really likes the other person. And but in the bigger group, sometimes there are personality clashes, like there are in any organization. But you have to control them in the military, because if you don't control them, then the higher authority will be on your case in no time still.
Did you stay in touch with any of your friends?
I did when I get back home. In fact, a friend of mine, Leo Morrison, who comes from Dorchester, Massachusetts, I got together with him, and he had some friends that were Marines. They weren't in my organization, but he had some friends that he would bring with him, so they became friends. And but he's the only one that I saw physically, in physical contact with. Some of the others I stayed in touch with. There was one little guy. He had the nickname of Toad. He was a little short, rugged guy from Louisiana. His name was Toad Ammons. And he came to Boston or actually to Lynn. We picked him up in Boston and brought him home. And he spent a couple of weeks with us, and we had a great time. And it was so good to see him. He was a great guy, but the nickname Toad was funny. He was short, redhead with freckles. He had a zillion freckles. Now, I don't know where the name Toad came from, but anyway, he didn't mind it. He seemed to, I think that was okay. And so everybody would call him Toad.
How do you spell his last name?
Ammons, I believe.
And you mentioned going on leave.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that, where you went and what you did?
I usually, going on leave, I went home. That was when I was living in Lynn, Massachusetts. And one of the things I did, I always tried to secure a date. Even though at the time I didn't have a steady girlfriend in those days, but I did have a few that I dated off and on, and that would stay in touch through the mail. And so I would go and see them, take them out to eat, go to a movie. Go to a movie was bigger than going out to eat in those days, for whatever reason. And but going around to see the family members, and I had lost my uncle in New Hampshire, my uncle who served so brilliantly in World War II, Uncle Bill Richardson, a great guy. He made the Merman's run to Russia with supplies for the Allies, and he had 7 ships torpedoed out from under him, and he survived all 7. And he ended up taking his own life.
Do you think that was PTSD?
I think it has to, because he saw so many horrible things. That particular part of the world, Russia, was heavily damaged by the Germans in World War II, and the civilian displacement was just at all-time high levels. And you can't see little children that are hungry and people that are damaged. The whole thing, I'm sure, was a nightmare for him. And it was hard to get him to talk about it. If you were sitting down with him, he wouldn't say a whole lot. He told me that he lost 7 ships. He was a lieutenant commander, so he was a high, an officer. And great guy, outdoorsman. And but while he was in service, his family left him. And his wife decided, that she didn't want to be with him anymore. And so that's extra trauma to add to all of the horrible things he had to witness. So I think PTSD is probably right, Mary. I think that covers a lot of area, that PTSD thing. But I think so. It's hard to erase. You can't erase those images. You can come to grasp with them only in that you recognize them, and you recognize that there are people in the human race that act otherwise. And it's very hard to understand for a lot of people. I think myself and my uncle included, to see the horrible things that people can do to one another. It's difficult, and I'm sure that had an effect on Bill, and perhaps the wife leaving certainly didn't help his mental outlook. And it's interesting that he didn't really consume a lot of alcohol, but he would drink a little bit of wine on occasion. I never saw him drunk. And whether he went to that stage, I really can't say, because he was in New Hampshire, we were in Massachusetts. But he was conflicted, and just being with him, you could sense that. And great guy, I think. I really admire him.
Now, he died when you were serving in Korea, is that right?
No, let me think now. Let me just think when his death was. No, actually, it was after. It was afterwards, before Afghanistan, but it was after Korea. It was when I was, home as a civilian. And, gosh, I'm going to say perhaps in the early 80s, but I'm not sure of that date, Mary. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Just not sure.
So can you tell me a little bit more about how you cope with having had traumatic experiences in war, and how do you cope with that? How do you deal with that?
I think one of the ways is I read about war, particularly since I became involved in Afghanistan. I've been reading a lot about some of the history of some of these wars, trying to find out for my own self what motivates men to go to war, and is there really such a thing as an honorable war? Is there really such a thing as an honorable attack on another nation? And these questions bother me, and I like to find out as much about it as I can. And from my own research and my own book and articles, I'm beginning to think that if someone in the government has something to say about the prospect of going to war somewhere, that whatever is offered as an excuse or motivation for that conflict, I'm immediately suspicious and try to find out more. And when we talk about Afghanistan, I can give you an example that I think is pretty well hard and fast, as they say, with the research that I've done. But,
Okay. All right. So where were you when your service ended?
my service ended in California at Treasure Island, and that's where I got discharged, 1954.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came home to become a card-carrying civilian.
Yeah, what was your homecoming like?
It was surprisingly quiet. My mom was particularly excited. I would have to say it was, my mother was very excited. My mother was a very supportive, like most mothers are. And I got, most of my meal came from my mom. And my dad didn't write too often. And my dad was a brilliant guy. He was a mathematician, he was an accountant, but he was almost too studious or something in his demeanor. And I didn't get, my letters from him were few, and they were rather cold, I would think, you know. And whereas with my mom, you know, as you can imagine, it was quite different with her. But my homecoming, to get back to your question, was it was perhaps understated. It was not. We did. The family got together, and I guess there were a few slaps on the back and handshakes and that kind of thing, but nothing extravagant, really. Of course, it was very good to get home and to at first revert to a little tiny room I used to sleep in when I was before I entered the military, you know. And with all the junk I brought home with me, I was wondering where it was all going to go. But it was pleasurable in any event to regain your home, you know, and regain your I'll say freedom, because when you're in the military, you're not really free. There's a degree of freedom, but it's just a degree. So,
Okay.
and then of course the business of finding employment became uppermost to me fairly soon. And I worked in so many things. I worked in training homing pigeons for a racer in Danvers, Massachusetts. My last job was as a salesperson in a defense contractor. And I liked that because of the foreigners I met and interesting people from government, even though I was always suspicious of some of their motives and things. But I didn't, in that role, I didn't think too much about the political import with war or weapons or whatever. I just sort of focused on adhering to the contract to the letter, because our contracts were funded by the U.S. government, and the number one client was the Egyptian army, and so you had to make sure that you did it right. And when they would ask you for advice and counsel, you had to make sure that you advised them properly. Like one, I remember, they wanted sniper rifles, and so we presented the very best American Remington 40X. Nobody will care about that probably, but Remington 40X rifles with loophole telescope sights, and which is the very best available in the country at the time. I, myself in particular, because I was into shooting, I recommended this to the colonel in charge at the embassy in Washington, and they bought them and were very happy with them. But I've done other things too. I worked in a shoe factory. I worked in retail stores. Oh gosh, Mary, I've just done about everything.
Did you go back to school?
I did, yes. I went back to Northern Essex Community College and to Harvard University.
On the GI Bill?
No, actually, on the GI Bill, yes. And not the Northern Essex, but on the Harvard was the GI Bill. And I haven't completed it yet, although, interestingly, the University of Afghanistan at Kabul is going to make me an honorary degree of some kind, but I can't go and get it because right now it's not safe for me because of my writing. Not just because I'm an American, but but number one, it's in those places you just never know if you have political adversaries somewhere out there that you probably never even know about or had any idea. You could walk right into something and be in trouble. So, but anyway, that's interesting. But the University of Nebraska at Omaha, I have to say, is my alma mater. And the reason I say that is because I have given them probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 or more articles, which they have accepted and approved, and they're in their archives. And of course, they have my photographs, as you noticed in the album. They have my photographic file which they treasure. And I got a nice letter from the dean of the university thanking me for the wonderful photographs and so on, and all of the material. And he himself was involved in Afghanistan, Tom Goodyear. I think at the time he worked for CIA. He never said that, but this is what I think. And he was involved on the early part of the Soviet-Afghan War. He was involved. The U.S. involvement in the various demeanors.
Okay. We've got just 15 minutes left, so let's kind of explain. We'll talk a little bit about your career. So you said you've done a lot of jobs, and but your career has been as a journalist?
Okay. Yes, my journalist exposure as a freelance journalist has been one as an independent. And what I would do, like when I came back from Afghanistan, I submitted articles to the various magazines, newspapers, etc. And I was published all over. My first one in 1988 was Soldier of Fortune magazine. and they did many more, but that was my very first publication. The next was the newspaper in my little town of Topsfield, Massachusetts, called the Tri-Town, a little paper. And in fact, in my book, of which I gave you a copy, it has a thing in there about my biographies. In one of the first pages is a listing of all my publications. U.S. News and Business Report, a World Report, they publish photographs in my article. There's a whole bunch of them in there, and on that page in my book. So.
Okay, so explain how you ended up in Afghanistan.
Okay, working for a defense contractor, in my office I had exhibited a number of wildlife photographs, 16 by 24 color photographs of brown bear, grizzly bear, polar bear, and other Arctic fox and other animals that I had gathered in travels to Alaska, to Northwest Territories in Canada, and so on. And the government people used to come in because they regulated us because we were involved in FMS sales, which they call foreign military sales. And they would come into the office and they would talk about different contracts, problem solving, and various things pertaining to the contract with Egypt, which was our number one customer. And while there, these government people were admiring my photographs on the wall. And one said one day, "Wow, you can really take a picture. Those are nice. We could use you." And so I said, "Oh, really? In what way?" So he mentioned what had just taken place with the Soviet president. Leonid Brezhnev was president of the Soviet Union at the time, and his spokesperson, Vitaly Smirnov, went public and said, "You American, French, and British journalists who dare to penetrate Afghanistan will be killed, and our forces will help the Afghans to do it." So when that became public, of course, they went all around the world, the U.S. government said, if we let this stand and the journalists are afraid to penetrate Afghanistan, we're not going to know anything about this war. And therefore, we devised a program called the Afghan Media Project, whereby American instructors would go to Pakistan on the border of Afghanistan. Shanghai training camp was one facility, but there were a number, and train the Afghans in using the 35 millimeter camera, because the Afghans could go in and out over the border and attract less attention than Americans, British, or French going in and across the border. They were immediately, of course, noticed because they were different and dressed different and acted different and didn't have command of the language. So to do that, the USIA, or U.S. Information Agency, was tasked with putting together a program called the Afghan Media Project. To do this, they needed to recruit journalists from around that were capable cameramen to go and train the Afghans in using a 35 millimeter roll film camera, and also to issue them the equipment. I was one of them, and proud to do it, and I really admired my people. I thoroughly enjoyed working with them. We issued them Pentax K1000 cameras with Sigma 35 to 135 millimeter telephoto lenses. We issued them little collapsible tripods so that they get some good sharp photos when that type of photo presented itself. We taught them all about exposure, and we trained them on one film, Kodachrome 64, which is my absolute favorite film of all time. It's a great film. Its storage qualities are forever in the reasonable conditions. Photographs last forever from Kodachrome 64, and most of all, they enlarge well, because 35 millimeters is only 24 by 36 millimeters. It's a very small image, and you can blow that up. I've blown them up to 16 by 24 inches, and they've stayed sharp. Some people have gone beyond that, but I think that's just a little bit extreme. And because high resolution was my thing, it had to be sharp and contrasty. So anyway, we taught them. One of my students, Syed Noor Husseini, became a very best friend. I've known him now 27 odd years or so. He guided me in and out of Afghanistan. He kept me from getting killed on a few occasions, and got me out of jail on one occasion when going through the tribal area of Pakistan on our way to Afghanistan. They arrested us and decided to sell me to the Russians for a sum of money. And my student, Noor, threatened them that if they did that, the Mujahideen would come back and they'd pay a heavy price for doing it. So they decided that they should probably not sell us to the Russians and let us go on. So we did go on. They released us, and we went on into Afghanistan. But he was able to take me around. He would introduce me to tribal leaders. He allowed me to sit comfortably inside a home with an Afghan family and feel welcomed. And because he told them that, I was there to help them and to help get the story of the war to the outside world, and they appreciated that. And they didn't have a lot of food, as people who are at war often have shortages, but they would still offer to feed us, and we would partake a little just so as not to hurt their feelings. But we didn't overdo it, because we realized that they didn't have enough for their own families. But I think one of the worst things that I experienced in Afghanistan was the exhumation of a mass grave. That was the burial ground that the communists murdered their political prisoners. And I don't know how many bodies were in there, but I know that the whole war, the Russians killed 2 million Afghans. And at this particular place in Kabul called Polygon, where this exhumation took place, I witnessed that, photographed that. And at some point I was told I may be called to testify at a UN investigation into war crimes. So I have those films, and there's one, I'm not sure if I don't think I published that in my new book, but anyway, that was another experience, I think, that tells me that I'm just not a fan of war. I think there has to be other ways of solving differences other than, because war might be between two that are hostile to one another, but it always encompasses everyone around them. You can't use weapons of mass destruction like big bombs and artillery without killing civilians and children. And Russians also use chemicals in Afghanistan too. That was another thing. So that traveling from village to village, some of the villages I traveled to who were a little bit removed from the heavier fighting were enjoyable. The people were warm and friendly and welcoming. And the countryside up there was not as damaged. It was not pockmarked from where cannon shells had landed and so on. It was relatively unscathed. Although when traveling in those places, myself and whoever else may have been in our party, we always had to duck from Russian helicopters because they shoot everything. You hear a helicopter coming, you better hide. Because the livestock, children, civilians, they didn't care. Anything that moved, they shot at. So that was something to consider. And also Russian patrols. The Russian patrols they weren't quite as adventurous as we were. They stayed a little closer to their bases. But you still had to be careful because you never know if 4 or 5 Russian guys show up and they see you before you see them. It could be obvious be trouble.
We've got just 5 minutes left,
Oh.
so I guess I just want to connect that story to your military service. You feel like your involvement in this project is directly connected to your experiences as a veteran?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm just to be clear, so you became involved in that project and then became a freelance journalist?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Get it. All right. So just a couple more questions just to wrap it up quickly. Okay. Did you join any veteran organizations?
No. I have not. No.
Okay. And you've talked about how the service has affected your life, obviously. And is there anything you wanted to add that hasn't been covered?
I think that most of us who are anti-war are not directing this towards veterans who serve, because the veterans who serve do not write the orders and decide to invade this country or that country. It has nothing to do. It's the political will in Washington that and the economics of it too cannot be ignored, because the economics of war is great for a lot of companies. And the Afghan pipeline, for example, the European press calls Afghanistan Pipelineistan, because that's what they think the war was all about. When the negotiations for the pipeline were faltering, then the U.S. actually told the Afghans, if we don't bury you in a carpet of gold, we'll bury you in a carpet of bombs. Oh no, if you don't accept a carpet of gold, we'll bury you in a carpet of bombs. This was months before 9/11. But that's very detailed, and we could probably go into that at another time in more detail. Probably don't have enough time on the tape to get into it, but I just think that I'm proud of my military service, and I think the United States is a wonderful and one of the best, if not the best, military capability in the world. But the political thinking in Washington, I have to say, leaves me cold. I guess maybe that's my final.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and thank you for your service, and thank you for taking the time to be interviewed.
Mary, thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Great, thanks.